Welcome back on the AM show. Ghana is in the grips of an economic downturn exacerbated by borrowing. And as of now, we're looking at the next tranche of the IMF's, disbursement of $600 million. But guess what? Before that, we have to go through the tango of disentangling that bid with our external creditors. $5.4 billion at stake. And that is what it's going to take to get the second tranche. But will we get there? What will be the consequences if we don't? What do we have to consider between now and then, later this month, when that meeting actually is concluded? Well, joining us for a discussion on these matters, we have Professor Bokpin. He is a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. He is with us. Prof, good morning.
And good morning to our cherished listeners.
All right. We'll also have joining the conversation Dr. Theo A. Champong, a banking consultant. He will join the conversation. But I'm going to kickstart the conversation with Isaac Kofi J, data analyst here with us at Joy News. Kofi, a very good morning to you. You would have to unmute, Kofi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, loud and clear. You're looking dapper this morning from the little I can see from where the laptop is. Yeah, you see, I got you smiling. Good to join the conversation. So, Kofi, tell us all, what is the status right now? How far have we come with this entire debt exchange? Now we are looking at our external creditors. What is the status quo, and what can we expect by way of meetings coming up and the hope of securing the second tranche of the IMF package?
Well, Ben, so according to the update given by the Finance Ministry themselves, when the Finance Minister actually met the external creditors or the investor community, he gave some sort of presentation painting a picture of Ghana's external debt, the magnitude, and what the government was hoping to restructure. Then he told us that the magnitude of our external debt was about $30 billion. Now, out of this $30 billion, we actually earmarked 20 billion out of that 30 billion for restructuring. The reason why we let some of the debt out is because the remaining belong to the multilateral creditors, i.e. the IMF, the African Development Bank, and other multinational organizations, where it was, according to the Finance Ministry, those debts were not part of the restructuring, bracket or parameter. Now, out of the 20 billion that we earmarked for restructuring, we expect about $5.4 billion to come from the bilateral creditors, i.e. here we are talking about the official creditors, which includes China, France, in fact, the Paris Club. So these are the people that will do about $5.4 billion. Then another leg of this problem is the external commercial creditors, what we call the Eurobond holders or the bond holders. There we've earmarked about 14.6 billion US dollars that we want to restructure that. So right from the word go, you know where the magnitude of the restructuring must be. 5.4 billion from bilateral, 14.6 billion from commercial. And the reason why it has become relatively easier to talk about the bilateral debt and make it a condition of the needed financing assurance to unlock the next 600 million is because if you look at this bilateral debt, the kind of restructuring or the terms and conditions for the restructuring is not as the same as what you will get at the commercial or the Eurobond level. The restructuring... Ben, can you hear me?
Please go ahead, I can hear you.
Yeah. The restructuring at the bilateral, circle or level is a bit easier because here, per what we know so far, government proposal or the accepted terms and condition is to suspend payment on interest for a period of time. What we understand is going to be about 4 years, and right after the 4th year, then we start, paying the debt. And that is the terms and conditions of the bilateral, debt restructuring. So you don't actually see some sort of specific haircut there. Per what we know, I have not really seen any, demand for a specific haircut. What we were looking for is relief for a period of time, and that period of time is going to be about 4 years. And that is why it was important to set a cutoff date for considering this debt. And so that is how probably soft, maybe not soft because we still have to go through the ordeal of talking to the official creditors, but it is relatively easier compared to the Eurobond, creditors. Now, we also know that this 5.4 billion debt that we are talking about is about 27% of the entire debt earmarked for restructuring. So in essence, we are almost through lifting about 27% of our debt burden for the next 4 years. Maybe our interest payment or debt servicing, we may not be doing that for the next 4 years. 27%. The biggest chunk of this whole debt restructuring has to do with the commercial creditors, which they hold about 73% of the amount earmarked for restructuring. And if you listen to the government and if you study the space, that is where you realize that that's the place that government want to get maximum haircuts from. So we know the proposals already. The proposal submitted for that restructuring is between 30 to 40, up to 40% haircut on principal and up to 5%, haircut on interest. So that tells you that government has almost shifted all the burden on the private creditors, which is the Eurobond creditors, because you are asking them to take as high as 40%, haircut on principal and 5% on interest. And it's the reason why it's become a bit sophisticated, complex, or should I say, we've not really seen progress as far as the commercial creditors are concerned, because the blue chip investors who bought these original bonds are currently not the ones holding them at the moment. They've actually sold them off when the economy was not really doing well, and we had all those downgrades. They sold them off to cut their losses. And those holding the commercial bonds right now are people who are risk takers. They are willing to hold on to the bond until maybe the dying embers of whatever agreement we'll have with them. And so you have a feel that maybe when you speak to some experts, they say government is not probably really keen on actual restructuring. What we are actually looking for is to just get the assurance to get the IMF money, disbursed or released. And so they say that we are only postponing our debt crisis. We are not doing actual restructuring that will give us actual reliefs. We are only hoping to get some sort of assurances to be able to get the IMF money. So the interest right now, or the focus right now, is to how to get the money and not how to, reduce our debt. Because what it looks like right now is that we are only postponing our debt crisis and not really doing a lot about really bringing it down. Because if you look at those that you are asking to take the biggest portion of this whole debt burden, is the private people. These are the people that you are hoping to, get the needed, fiscal beauty to go back to them and also go and borrow again in the Eurobond space. And so that's how, difficult the whole thing is. We may be through with the official creditors, but the biggest problem then is actually ahead, where we'll be hoping to restructure about 14.6 billion of our external commercial creditors. And that's where the major problem lies.
Well, thank you for situating the conversation, Kofi. Let me now come to Professor Bokpin, who is actually a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. When you look at the fact that this is where we are, we're trying to restructure 14.6 billion of our debt, of course, 5.4 billion also in terms, that is what we're aiming at restructuring. But then you look at how things have turned out within this first quarter. From late last year, we were expecting to be able to be done with this so that at the tail end of last year, hopefully in the last quarter, we could have had the second tranche of the disbursement of $600 million. That has not happened. We've waited until January. I know as of last week, we had a draft term sheet from some of these external creditors. What does all of this mean? Some say that should suffice for the IMF to give us the second tranche. From where you sit, what is your reading of that matter?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think your colleague has said almost everything. To the extent that the IMF managing director, in terms of the proficiency of the term sheet, to the extent that the IMF managing director has stated that they are satisfied with the draft term sheet, and that is in line with the broad DSA-based sustainability analysis of the framework. Yeah, we can go along with that, but because the actual details of the term sheet are yet to be worked out and agreed with the individual countries who form the official creditor committee, co-chaired by China and France, there is still a lot that has to be done going forward. But the IMF had insisted that the first review, though we reached staff level agreement in October last year, and for the IMF's own program outline, the first review should have been completed by 1st November 2023. Completion would mean that it should have gone to board for approval. What caused that delay was the fact that they needed some agreement from the official creditor committee. So the IMF wasn't asking for agreement from both the restructuring of external bilateral and external commercial. Their focus was on the external bilateral. So to the extent that that has been issued now, we can say that we have scaled that wall, and therefore the board will meet, and that should unlock the $600 million. And then, of course, from other official financing sources that they include the World Bank and stuff like that. But there's something that your colleague said that is quite interesting. So the point is that what we are reading from the term sheet looks more of debt moratorium, right? So if you are supposed to make some principal repayments this year, the next year, you wouldn't have to make those payments. That would constitute relief for you this year or last year. Remember that when government triggered its application under the G20 Common Framework, they took advantage of the debt service suspension clause of the G20 Common Framework and did not pay the coupons on its external debt. As at the end of 2023, government had accumulated more than $2 billion. So what that means is that that money that could have gone to creditors was now available to the country simply because of the view not paying. But then if you look at it broadly, in the medium to the long term, then you begin to associate with the interjection made by your colleague that to what extent that this led to long-term debt sustainability, right, over a longer term. And that is where I believe that there is some level of risk that we have to bear in mind. It may satisfy the concerns of the IMF. Remember, the IMF program, whether we like it or not, is not so long-term, right? 2026 is going to be difficult to say we have achieved their sustainability. Probably a logical outcome would be ask for extension. So we said
an extension for how long? Another 2 years or another 4 years?
Another 2 years or so. Remember when the program was approved on May 17, 2023, when we examined it, our conclusion was that this is a program that is designed with extension in mind. So it's not going to be a 3-year program. Bear that in mind. Because if you look at the debt contour, the tragedy, and the country's own history, and the level of fiscal primary surplus that we'll be able to record, bearing in mind an election year in 2024, and the possibility of fiscal slippages, there's real risk, right, that we have to bear in mind. But to the extent that this agreement on time scarcity paves the way for the board to meet and approve our first review, I think we can take that with both hands. Remember, that is all we have been looking for. But it doesn't mean we are out of the room. I'm sure colleagues mentioned that there's a lot of work now to do in translating the aspirations of the 10 states into actual and working out the details with member countries. But after all, even if we have progress from that, that is just $5.4 billion out of the $20 billion universe of eligible bonds available for restructuring. So there's still the bulk of the debt to be restructured, so it's yet to come. But of course, I agree with the Minister of Finance that with this progress, at least it gives government that space to also shift considerable attention to the restructuring of the external commercial. So there's a long way for us to go. But bear in mind, times are hard everywhere, and that will guide the country in terms of how far we can push, in terms of the level of haircut that they have to take. Even if it comes in the form of moratorium, we could still estimate haircut if we look at the present value of the old bond vis-a-vis the present value of the new bond, given the new interest rate and the maturity term. We can still estimate a haircut from there in present value terms. We'll call that one the realized investor loss.
Looking at how much we're hoping to restructure, but maybe even before I get there, let me find out from you. What would the implications be if we do not get the next tranche of $600 million as soon as possible? Let's say we miss getting it within this month. What would be the consequences?
Hey, that would be quite serious for us. Already, we cannot discount the fact that the delay from November last year to now has not had an effect on the economy. Remember, the country got to 8 weeks end, and on 3rd July 2022, the president made a call to the IMF. So we felt that the only hope was to lean on the IMF. So come to think of it, that the IMF program itself is not working. Right, we are not getting the inflow the way we had expected. That considerably increases the economic uncertainty and probably undermines the confidence and the recovery that we have made so far. And therefore, I want to stop thinking about we're not getting it. We're not getting the board approval. I'm more focused on one direction, that there is no other way. We have to work towards getting the board approval. But at the end of the day, I can agree with you to some extent. How much is $600 million? This economy is worth billions of dollars. How much is that? If it's that unlocks World Bank support and all of that, we're actually looking at it around $1.2 billion. How much is that in this economy worth billions of dollars? I hope you understand that. So in all of this, it's not like we are really going to get some kind of inclusive economic growth and all of that will really change the fortunes of Ghanaians. No, not at all. So that is why we have said earlier that, look, despite the progress that we made from the IMF supported program, this country must sit down and begin other reforms, fiscal, governance, productivity, structural, that will complement the gains that we make from the IMF program. Other than that, this program only sets up for the next IMF program.
Let me also bring in Dr. Theo Champong, who joins the conversation, gentlemen. He's a banking consultant. Dr. Champong, a very good morning to you.
I'm an economist, not a banking consultant.
I thought you had added something to your portfolio. Okay, let's stick to economist, Dr. Theo Champong. Well, so I'd like to find out from you. The draft term sheet has been presented. Those discussions have been had. But the question is, from where we sit, how good a position do we find ourselves in terms of securing the next tranche of $600 million? And what would be the consequences? The same question I posed to Professor Bokpin. What would be the consequences? Because we know where we are currently. If we don't get this next tranche of the $600 million, it's going to worsen our balance of payments as well as, the international reserves as well. We know that as of August 2023, the international reserves would suffice for just a month of import cover. So as we sit here, we know that our balance of payment is going to be affected. Our international reserves are going to be affected. And add that to the fact that within this first quarter, government will have to fork out some $120 million thereabouts for the bulk distribution companies. All of this means if we don't get this, from where some people sit, it could be near chaotic. What picture do you see?
I'm actually very confident that the money is going to come, and I have been for a while now. So I do recall back in late November, early December, having had similar discussions on other platforms and indicating that although the money had been delayed, so the first review of the IMF program had been completed as far back as October of last year, and we were expecting the 600 million to come in around first, second week of November. That did delay because of what Prof has explained, the bilateral external debt restructuring negotiations and what to expect. That was really the main hurdle. And from all indications, that hurdle for now has been crossed, right? So what that means is that come in 3 or 4 days' time, when the IMF Executive Board meets, then they're actually going to now consider the review of the first program, which Ghana completed as far back as October of last year. And then subsequently, when they review and okay that, then the 600 million is going to be released. So I did indicate a while back that that money was going to come sometime towards the end of January, and there were even some disagreements with other sort of discussions to that effect. But what is very clear now is that the money would come, and then the other forms of financing from the World Bank and the likes would also sort of come through. The biggest impact for me is not really sort of the short-term boost to the reserves to pay BDCs or to pay other, liabilities of the government. I think it was really more again to do with the confidence and the signal that this sent to broader market participants in the economy. I was worried that if this had delayed even further going into, say, for example, February or March, and into that crucial period where companies have closed their finances for the year and begin to repatriate their profit, etc., then people would begin to take or gamble on the cedi all over again, and you may see some massive depreciation of the currency like we saw, the last few years. But given that this has actually come through and the release of the funds also be coming through, that would go in a long way to bolster the reserves, and importantly send a signal that the IMF program is somewhat on track. There are challenges, there are some things or some areas that we still have got to meet. But for this phase of the program and implementation, it's actually quite a positive thing. What happens next is also quite important. So if you look at the program structure, by the beginning of May, right, we should have had the second review of the program. And this time around, we're going to be using the December 2023 performance criteria as the basis for that. That is where, again, there might be one or two challenges, in terms of, okay, now you've got the bilateral debt somewhat being restructured. And like Prof said, it's not going to be an outright sort of cancellation. You're getting some moratorium and some extension of, interest payments here and there, and we can work out what that means in present value terms. But the important thing now going forward now becomes, are you able to also use the principle of the comparability of the debt treatment to rework out your external commercial debt, which is really one of the biggest, issues that we've got to deal with. And as we've seen, even with Zambia late last year, they got something agreed, but then the official creditors came back and the bilateral official came back and said, we don't agree with what you signed on to with the commercial creditors. So that, I think, is a bit of the headwinds that we need to look out for. But overall, for what has been agreed now, that money would come through towards the end of the month, and it's going to bolster, yes, the reserves, but importantly, signal that the program is relatively on course, and that helps in sort of safeguarding the relative stability of the city.
Doc, so basically, money no day for hand, but you're saying that we're sitting pretty good right now. We're sitting pretty. It's a good position we're in, and that we'll get the money before the close of January. That's what you're saying. That's your forecast.
Absolutely, because what we need to do, we have done, and then what was the hurdle, which was getting this external bilateral arrangement done or agreed, we have done. You look at the IMF statement, and it's very clear that they're going to table that to the board for the first review of the program. So I'm relatively confident.
Okay.
That we're going to be getting that. But like Prof said, and I'm also reiterating, there are bigger issues that we've got to deal with beyond this, going into the second review of the program in May of 2024.
Professor Bokpin, before we look at some of the footage coming from the Finance Ministry, among others, Prof, I'd like to find out from you, are you as optimistic as Dr. Theo Acheampong? Do you also forecast that by end of this month, we should have secured the second tranche of $600 million? Professor Bokpin, if you're with me, that question was meant for you. All right. We'll try to get Professor Bokpin back to respond to that. I was just trying to find out how optimistic he was, whether he was thinking along the lines of Dr. Theo Acheampong. But for now, my colleague George Wiafe has been interacting with Ken Oforiatta on expectations on all of this going forward. And this is what the Finance Minister had to share.
Good place for that engine to be cranked, for us to see the jobs back and the projects being. So that's a good part.
So that's about that because of this, we're going to see some of these.
Exactly.
What do you look for in terms of the broader impact of what has happened on the economy?
I'm expecting a pretty robust year with regards to the economy. We will make sure that job creation continues. We will make sure that the social protection is not compromised, and certainly industry will be supported. The mutual prosperity dialogue, which is engaging government more actively with the private sector, will continue. And I think we'll continue to hold our heads up in the months ahead.
All right, so that is the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, on all of this. Let's take a look at some of what he says. He expects a pretty robust year in terms of the economy. That is one. Robust is relative, but I'll leave you to read between the lines. He also talks about the fact that industry will be supported. And of course, he talks about the private sector, labor in there. I'd like to find out what your reactions are when the finance minister gives such assurances. Already, the system is pretty tight. Like I mentioned, even in terms of our import cover, as of August 2023, we had just 1 month. I've pointed to what we'll have to cough up when it comes to BDCs, about $120 million within this quarter, even if we get the $600 million. So the question is, this robustness of economy, how do you think we're going to manage that, Dr. Theo Champo?
It's a good question you asked. We're only in January, and if you look at some of the indicators on growth, on inflation, and on other sort of high-level frequency data, yes, it does show that things are beginning to improve in relative terms, but they're still high, right? For example, with inflation, it's still well over 20%, and it still there's room for it to come down much further. But compared to where we were 2 years ago, things are in a much better shape, and you can look at all the core indicators, and that's quite clear. At the micro level is where the challenge is, when it comes to translating some of these gains into growth, into kind of call it relative prosperity. The last 2 years has been tough for many households in the country, and even some of the gains that the government has been talking about, some of which I've also highlighted here, it's going to take a while for that to translate into improving livelihoods, and incomes. And I think for the government, they are trying to push for as much of the gains to be felt now, given that you have an election in December of this year, and people have been squeezed very, very hard for the last, 2 years. So there's a bit of rhetoric on the other side in trying to drum up and sort of make it look as though some of these gains are beginning to improve. But if you look at the cost of doing business, if you look at the high tax environment, to the point that now even electricity, bills are going to be taxed. If you look at the fact that you're still having to pay in excess of 30% to borrow to be able to do business in the country, that is still constraining. And those are the things that, beyond the talk of economic growth, beyond the talk of debt restructuring, the emphasis now begins, to move into productivity and the structural reforms that then ensures that you have jobs, ensures that the cost of business comes down, and ensures that those high-level numbers of gains are translated at the micro level. That challenge, I do not foresee it being resolved, overnight, even going into, the crucial election period. So there's still a very long way for us, to go.
All right. Professor Bokpin, welcome back. I was asking a question earlier before I got to the finance minister's statement, his interaction with my colleague George Riafe. Dr. Theo Champo paints the picture of optimism, where he is hoping, barring any unforeseen developments, that by end of January, we should have the second tranche of $600 million. My question to you, how optimistic are you that we can actually manage that by close of January? It appears we've lost Professor Bokpin again. Prof, are you there? Okay, we don't have Professor Bokpin. So moving on with all of these, you've mentioned inflation. There's an interesting picture, Dr. Theo Champon, because when we look at inflation, year on year, it's going down. Month on month, it is not. Inflation is actually looking north. It's going higher month on month. The cost of goods out there is still going high. And with all these dynamics, yes, you made mention of what attempts have been made by government on the macro level. The problem is it hasn't trickled down to the micro level, and we know of everything in between. What is your reading of that as far as this debt situation is concerned? Before we get to the breakdown of what we owe and what we can expect from our external creditors.
Yeah, so two responses to that on the inflation. Yes, you're right when you look at the month on month, but again, the inflation analysis is always with reference to a particular time period, right? So yes, if you look on month, you might see a bit of an uptick. But if you extend the series and you look at it also from where we were even, year on year or quarter on quarter as well, it's a different picture, a different story.
Okay, Doc, I'll come back to you briefly. Just hold for me because Professor Bokpin has to squeeze in just a little time for us. So please hold on to your thoughts. I'll be right back to you. Professor Bokpin, welcome back on the show.
Thank you.
So I was posing.
Good friend, you are Champon.
Yes, I was asking whether you were as optimistic as Theo Champong that would get the second tranche by close of January. And how do you respond to the finance minister when he says 2024 is going to be a robust year in terms of the economy, and that industry will be supported, of course. Looking at the macro versus the micro, inflation, taxation, everything in between. What is your take?
Well, thank you very much. I associate with the comment by Dr. Theo Champong that we're certainly going to scale the ball in getting the next tranche of 600 million. The IMF managing director has already tweeted that they are broadly satisfied with the term sheet, and therefore the board will be meeting. So we'll hold them to that. Yeah, so that will come. As to 2024 being a good year and all of that, look at the way that the government welcomed Ghanaians in 2024. Happy New Year message was a VAT in electricity consumption about a certain amount. That is how you start the year, right? So if a government Happy New Year message to consumers is imposition of VAT on electricity consumption in such an economy, in such time, then you want to tell me that 2024 will be a year to remember. I think that is the other aspect of government communication that unsettles analysts. Okay, where government keeps on a certain narrative which is completely off the reality. Okay, you are inflicting pain on people and you are telling them you are well. You are well. So how they feel is irrelevant. Okay. So if government wants to drastically make improvements in the lives of Ghanaians in 2024, we need to be very careful that does not come with the usual physical slippages. Okay, we don't need to overspend to win over elections, because the consequences of that after the election will come back to bite us as Ghanaians. So, for instance, if government decides that from the second half of this year, July, we are going to increase salaries of public sector workers by, let's say, 30% and the rest of them, and that will be simply because you want to cut voters. Okay, do we have the fiscal space to accommodate that and all of that? So, my message to Ghanaians will be that yes, we've seen some relative stability. And as Dr. Joe Champon said, it takes time for the macro level development to transit to micro, household level. And that consistency is what is important. In this country, we don't do the right things consistently for a very long time. Right? So we start off so well, then we are off the track, and then we try to bring ourselves back, and that could be very costly, and the rest of them. Bear in mind that when you are talking about making changes in the lives of people, you are not talking about 12 months. You are looking at this in the medium to the long term, and therefore I would advise, my position would be that government needs to be moderate. If you remember, when government started saying that they had turned the corner, it was somewhere middle of last year. When they presented the media review in July, they said they have turned the corner. Okay, and where is the impact? Interest rate is still very high. In fact, the Ghana reference rate is more than 30%. Bank of Ghana's policy rate is 30%, still 30%. Okay, so if you look at the broad subsectors of the economy, things have not recovered inclusively or broadly in a way that will trickle down to the ordinary Ghanaian. Let me ask you a question. When we decide as a country, sitting on the coupons of investors, to have a cocktail over an inflation of 26.3%, right? Did we go to check whether the inflation that pushed over 850,000 Ghanaians into poverty has equally recovered? Have they recovered? Have they changed course? They have not. We are still living through the fiscal austerity to restore macroeconomic stability. We are still living through that. Look at taxes. Okay? Have companies turned the corner? No. Have individuals turned the corner? No. Even if we ended inflation, we ended 2023 with inflation of 23.2%, please, that is still very high by world average. In fact, it's still very high compared to our regional peers. It's still very high compared to our structural peers. It's still very high compared to our aspirational peers. Then look at food inflation. Food inflation is more than 27%. In fact, food inflation in the Eastern region is more than 40%. Check the data. Right? So you see the marginality. You see the differences. In a country where income levels are very low, we have gone through haircuts. We have gone through all kinds of taxes. So when food inflation is that high, the impact is very high. And food is what takes more than 42% of household expenditure. So yes, we've seen some relative stability. Let's be moderate with the celebration. And then let's build on that. Let's be honest and truthful to the reality. We don't lose anything by telling Ghanaians that we've made some progress, but there's still a lot to be done. Bear with us. Let's carry along. There's nothing wrong with that.
A quick add-on before maybe we look at former President Mahama's comments, and if you have the time, I can take your thoughts on that as well. IC Research has some forecasts. You know that as of last year, looking at the value of the cedi lost to different currencies, 22.5% to the American dollar, 24.9% to the British pound, 22.8% to the euro. Now, as it stands now, you're looking at an exchange rate of about 12.3 to 1 American greenback, the dollar. The projections are that if things don't go well, we don't get this money as quickly as possible, it could rise to as much as 13.10 midway through. You've already shared your optimism, but when it comes to the rate of depreciation or appreciation of our currency, what are your projections, let's say by mid-year?
Okay, so typically in economics, when we talk about stability, it's not the same as same price across time. So with a certain level of depreciation of the cedi to the major trading currencies will still be considered to be stable, right? And therefore, any variation in excess of 4-5 thereabouts, we are a bit concerned. But given that it's also an election year, our own Prof tells us that we have not been able to walk our talk and talk our walk in terms of fiscal discipline and all of that in all the major competitive elections. And therefore, there's possibility of fiscal indiscipline, which in itself could derail some of the gains that we have made. Way back in November last year, we had maintained that we expect that the cedi will be trading above 13 Ghana cedis to a dollar, yes, because that's the dominant currency in Ghana. Any depreciation that is usually within the broad contours or expectations, we can take that. Remember, whilst we are celebrating stability with the IMF program, we are still seeing some depreciation, right? But we can say it's relatively stable compared to what it was in 2020 when there was a run on the CD and the rest of them. So we can still talk about relative stability, even though the CD depreciated perhaps marginally and all of that, because price stability necessarily is not the same price across time.
Let me now just stay with us a little bit, Prof, if you may. Former President Mahama has been speaking about a number of things. He's been talking about the fact that should his administration assume the reins of power, Ghanaians should be patient with them and that there's quite a hurdle to go past. Let's listen to Mr. President on this bit, the former president.
Let me beforehand tell you that our country's economic situation is in a very dire state. The MPP has brought Ghana's economy to the lowest ebb that has ever been seen in our history. We are broke. We are indebted. There's hardship in the land. There's no money in the system. People do not have disposable incomes. Pensioners' monies have been taken. Bondholders' monies have been taken. And so it's created a very critical situation for us. And therefore, we are very measured in the promises that we make, because we know that we're going to come and inherit a very difficult situation. And so we would urge that when we come into office, you understand the mess that we have inherited. We have the men and women who can work to turn it around. But we will all have to understand the situation and be patient as government works to put the economy back on its feet. And so while you are making demands, if government comes, help us with this, help us with that, yes, we will. But initially, the first thing we have to do is to bring the economy back to life. And I know that as soon as we come, one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to hold a national conference, a national economic dialogue, and we're going to bring all stakeholders together. We'll open the books for you to see the mess that the NPP has left for all of us and what we have to do to be able to bring it back. My brothers and sisters, when NDC was leaving office, the total public debt was 120 billion cedis. Total from Kufuor's time, Atta Mills, Rawlings' time, Nkrumah's time, we owed only 120 billion. Today we owe almost 600 billion.
Professor Bokpin, so you've heard the former president. He's calling for a grace period should his administration come to power. He says he'll have a national economic dialogue reminiscent of what was held during his tenure, involving, well, practically all facets of our national life to deliberate on the economy. Is it a good call, do you think, this call he's making? And do you trust that a future NDC administration would be able to execute something like this? What's your take?
First, I will look at the cost consensus building. I think that is important. It's one of the things that has been lacking in this administration. And once you fail to do that, then it's difficult to get largely the people alone. So that is a big point. My disagreement with the other aspect of asking for time is that Ghanaians were not ungrateful. We are largely realistic. We know what government, or we can have an idea of what a new government can do in the first year, second year, third year. We can have a fair idea. Given also that we are under an IMF program, we can. But this should not be an excuse for non-performance. Let me give you a historical perspective. Since 1992, anytime there was a regime change, the new administration, all that they do in the first year is actually not working hard to improve the lives of Ghanaians, but they practically use the first year to run down the party that lost. We spend considerable energy telling how bad the other people have been, and we lose focus on the fact that we have a mandate to make change. There are some things that can be done in a week, some things that can be done in a month, in a quarter, in a year. I think that is more important. That's more important. Yes, we can review the past, but there's no future in the past. Lives are being impacted on daily basis. So we need to strike a good balance of how we want to score political points by focusing on the past versus the need to mobilize quickly within the shortest possible time to see what we can do and demonstrate. But a good way for the former president to demonstrate to Ghanaians that he will do something drastic will be informed by how he manages the transition.
Okay.
And how he manages the various agitations within the NDC, hoping to take over, tolerate everything that could be taken over. A good way to demonstrate to Ghanaians that change has come is to form a lean government within the shortest possible time.
To form a lean government within the shortest possible time?
Yes, a lean government within the shortest possible time, not more than 40 minutes. And set the ground rolling. Some time can be devoted to reviewing the past. Yes, we will do that. But more time will be devoted to doing the right thing from day one. There cannot be any longer honeymoon. Ghanaians have had to make honeymoon. Okay? But the reality is that governance is a continuum. Yes, some level of patience we can ask from Ghanaians. I don't know whether Ghanaians will have some patience left. But yes, that is fine. A new government needs to settle in and the rest of them. But the former president, if he wins, has considerable experience about managing transition and the rest of them. So that didn't take him that long. He should set the ground rolling. Like anyone who dies, we can't bring the person back. So let's not waste a minute to major on the minor. Ghana has a future to build. Life to be transformed. That is more important. So, yes, we agree. Of course, bear in mind that usually in the last quarter of all the competitive election years, there's usually lack of disclosure of data and the rest of them. Therefore, when we are done with the elections, we'll be counting not only votes, after that, we'll be counting deaths and so many things. Let's do that quickly because our attempt to unnecessarily blame the outgoing government could in itself create disaffection.
Right.
In how the new government will be able to mobilize Ghanaians along a certain path.
Right.
To charge. Remember that any party, the two main parties, over the period, they are assured of almost 40% of the vote, more or less.
Right.
That is a sizable number. Okay, so you will need to cut both the opposition and then your own people along a certain path, because without that, you may not be able to carry through the structural reforms that will be very painful. There will be too much division.
Right.
Remember that when we are talking about development at the national level, development at the national level must reflect what we call the 5 Ps. What are those 5 Ps? Development must be about people. It must preserve our planet Earth. It must also preserve peace. So the development that divides Ghanaians is not development. We want development that brings Ghanaians together as one people, regardless of our tribal affiliations. So that is how we assess development at the national level. It must reflect the 5 Ps. It must be about people. So if we say inflation has come down, it must reflect in the lives of the people.
Right.
It must reflect peace. It must preserve our planet Earth. So if the government says they have turned the corner, they should equally tell us how Galamsey has stopped. Because that is our planet Earth. You cannot talk about economic recovery when you are destroying your forest, destroying the rural ecosystem that supports life.
Right.
Water as its embodiment. That is not development.
Okay,
and
so
the program must reflect partnership, prosperity.
Right.
So development that brings Ghanaians together. That is what we call development, not development that divides us.
Prof,
No.
I know you have to go. Give me 10 seconds or 5 seconds of your time. Straightforward answer. How much time do you think an NDC administration would need to get things stable again? 3 months, 6 months, 1 year plus? What do you think?
Look, the former president, right now, their own analysis will be pointing to a certain direction.
Which is what?
The conclusion is that they are going to win. They should start forming things now. So that the day they are sworn in, they start going.
Yes, but how long do you think, even if they hit the ground running, how long do you think it will take?
Well, usually the first year is usually for consultation issues and the rest of them. So maximum after 1 year, we should be seeing the footprint of the new administration.
Okay.
Some may say
All right.
into the medium to the long term, but
Okay.
the starting point is important, and the hope that they give in terms of the quality of the leadership the former president brings to bear.
Right.
He defines his administration more than the food he serves on the table immediately.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Bokpin, for your time with us. Professor Godfred Bokpin is a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Dr. Theo Champo, my sincere apologies. We had to clear a few issues with Professor Bokpin, who has to head into some meetings. Doc, so coming back to you, I just want your thoughts on these same matters I have run by him. You've heard from the finance minister. You've heard from the former president. What are the linkages? What can work and what will not work?
I think Prof has said most of the points, which I very much align with. I mean, yeah, when the finance minister talks about robust economy, often my reaction is, what is the definition of robust? Is it just macroeconomic indicators or numbers like inflation and policy rate and things like that? Or it actually goes beyond to look at issues of, the real economy, employment, living incomes, wages, cost of doing business, the high tax environment that we've all been, complaining about. If you look at it with a much wider lens or scope, the issue of robust for me becomes a bit, suspect, in the sense that I don't see how we're going to be talking robust with only 10, 11 months to the election. And even remember that most times, by the time we get to about half year, most of these government agencies and some of the bosses they're all out there campaigning. And, there's not much work that gets done. So I struggle to accept the robust narrative which is being painted. In
other words, you have your doubts about this robust economy that the finance minister is speaking of.
Minister is talking about. Yes, I do have doubts. If you look at it purely from just the narrow macroeconomic numbers, you can make an argument for robust. But if you expand it to look at the real economy, the real sector, cost of living, and borrowing and all of that, I don't see how that is going to be the case. It will take at least 3 years or so to turn, things around properly to see that robust being felt at the micro level. And it relates to also what President Mahama had been saying in the tape that you played about that, they are going to bring the economy back to life, and they're going to convene some national dialogue.
So a national economic dialogue, and he's calling for a grace period that Ghanaians should bear with him. I posed that question to Professor Bokpin. What do you make of it, and how long do you think? Professor Bokpin said maximum a year plus.
Yeah, I think, look, the former president has had the benefit of being president before. That's the one distinguishing feature that he brings that others haven't had. I don't think that he needs 1 year to sort of turn or begin to hit the ground running, as we say in Ghana.
How long then?
I think within 3 months to about 5-6 months, we should begin to see some palpable or tangible results and some gains being felt. Especially given also that he says he would have convened this national dialogue, and a lot of maybe recommendations and new ideas that would have come that he can take and start running with straight away on the economy, and straight away also on governance.
Dr. Champong, you do realize that a new administration, there will be a lot of backlog issues to deal with. 3 to 6 months, even if there are policies, whenever this is convened, this economic dialogue, when it is convened, whatever emanates from there, that in itself could take about 3 to 6 months to bring to bear. So how feasible is 3 to 6 months?
It shouldn't take 3 to 6 months for it to begin to bear. You have had the benefit of someone who has actually been president before and knows how this country is run. And number two, it's also about the signaling and the intent that comes across pretty much straight away, right? So I'm not saying that they have to do everything within 3 to 6 months, but the signal that they send in the early stages of, potentially a new administration is absolutely and fundamentally, important, with something new being done. And this is where, again, I get a little bit concerned, even with some of the rhetoric that President Mahama is highlighting. So in one sense, you want to bring the economy back to life, and he uses or gives some debt numbers also in the tape that you played. But then if you do the relative analysis, right, no one or no administration can escape blame when it comes to these indicators. So let me give you two points. President Mahama talks about them leaving government with a total public debt of 122, 123 billion Ghana cedis. That is true. When they came into power back in 2008, the total debt was 9.7 billion, right, Ghana cedis. So if you do that relative comparison between 9.7 to 122, the increment there is almost 13 times. Yeah. If you take from 2016, that 122, and you take the current number now, which is around 600 or so billion, or a little bit more than that, you take 600 plus, divide that by your 122, 123, that gives you an increment which is 5 times. So again, let's be careful. I get where President Mahama is going, and part of this, call it narrative or rhetoric. But again, when you look at the record that their government came and left, and you compare it and you do the analysis, you're talking almost 13 times on his side versus about 5 times now. All of them have, done things that have impoverished Ghanaians, things that have, made the cost of living dire, particularly even for this administration in the last few years. But when a certain narrative or picture is being painted, which again, when you look at the data and the numbers, it's not fully substantiated, then for me as an analyst, I see a bit of a disconnect between that rhetoric and then the record that they had when they were, in administration. So I support his call for that national dialogue. I don't think that you need more than a year to start beginning to implement and to see some immediate quick results or quick wins. And it's really all about.
But Doc, that was exactly what I was asking you. When I posed the question to Prof, I asked him 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. He said a year plus. I asked you, you said 3 to 6 months. That is why I was asking you 3 to 6 months hard, definitive, or now you're saying not more than a year. So which is which?
No. I'm saying that we look at what are the quick wins that can be done within 3 to 6 months on the economic front, right? Some of the the reforms that need to be done. And then what are the wins that you can attain over the medium term,
right,
beyond that 1 year, going into 2 years. We cannot lump everything together. That's the point that I'm making.
all right.
That we need to have clear benchmarks and clear indicators in terms of what can be done. And I'm sure that whatever the outcomes are from both the manifesto that they will present to Ghanaians and also from this economic dialogue that will be held, there are some things that can be implemented and we can see results within 3 to 6 months.
All right. My final bit to you, Dr. Theo Champong. So let's assume, like we're all forecasting, by close of month, we get the next tranche, $600 million. We have to give $120 million to the BDCs, among others, to ensure that we get oil coming into the country, oil products or petroleum products. What then would be your expectation with what we can do with this money to shore up our economy ahead of the review in May? What would you like to see? So January, we've got the $600 million. How do we manage our affairs between January and May when it's time for the review? Quick thoughts and we're gone.
Two things. Manage our affairs on the revenue front and managing our affairs. I think the important one is on the spending or the expenditure, front. And that is where the biggest challenge has been and would be this year, with the election. After February, when most of the primaries have been conducted and we know who is going to contest, on the various constituencies for the two parties, we must exercise some caution on the spending, front. I expect that because this money has come in, some of the proposals to increase the VAT on electricity and all of that, probably the government should scale back. The timing is not right, and especially the fact that we still have very heavy headwinds when it comes to the cost of doing business and inflation. Those are the things that we've got to do between now and May for the second review. And then the indicators for the second review quickly is actually going to be based on the performance of the economy as of the end of 2023, December 2023.
Doc, thank you so much for your time with us this morning. We greatly appreciate your time. Those who joined us for this conversation, Isaac Ofieje, of course, he is our data analyst in here at Joy News. We also had, you just heard him, Dr. Theo Champong. He's an economist, and Professor Godfred Bokpin, a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. While staying on some of these matters, today we introduce a new segment of the AM show. We call it AM on Wheels. And we'll be in your communities to hear what your challenges are, and we'll also get your members of parliament to respond to those issues. So we start off today. We'll be in the Anyasa Utuam constituency, where Sweetie Abochi will be giving us a scoop live from that constituency, from the constituents and what they want to see in Anyasa Utuam. That conversation up next, right here on the AM show. You don't want to go anywhere. We'll be right back.